the DPS spec tanking classes can taunt something and tank it for several seconds if they use all their cooldowns. So there was a lot of utility that existed in the game, and they've been trying to eliminate that utility, or at least reduce it. And so this elimination of AoE taunt for non-tanks, I think, is in that vein, and it makes sense. I'm glad that they're doing that for others. If they ever got to the point where a healing spec healer was the only one who could cast battle res, like, I think that's going too far. And at this point, I think, yeah. So
Actually,
speaking,
okay, so can I confirm or have denied? Does it seem like with this expansion, healers and the stress that's being placed on healers has actually been increased, even though there's a lot more that they can do?
I think it depends on things. So in story mode, there are arguably three bosses that are more challenging to heal than story modes have been in the past. Like they're not as challenging as a lot of people think they are, but they're above the other story modes, that's for sure. And those bosses are the Walkers, Underlurker, and Bulo. Though there you have to kind of pay attention to things, and it's a little bit more stressful. In hard mode, certainly healers are being pushed a lot, and I think healers are being tuned down a bit to be tighter with respect to the content, which is a really good change. Since, in previous tiers of content, it was sort of a given that you'd be able to heal through stuff outside of some very specific fights and some very specific phases, and it was more like, okay, well, how much DPS can you apply? How much off DPS can you do at these points or that points? And sort of you weren't really pushed as a class. Now it's a little bit tighter, just because I think the healers are tuned down. The healers are not tuned tighter, but they're definitely tuned down.
Which I imagine a lot of healers being upset with this, but for me, now that I'm actually diving into the healer side of things, because it's more challenging, I'm more attracted to actually participating in it.
I 100% agree. I've been healing on my commando, which has been my primary healing class, the only healing class that I really cared about since 1.2, and I have been having a blast. It is so much fun to be really pressured, really stressed. I honestly haven't had this much fun healing something since pre-nerf Nightmare Dreadguard. It's just really, really, really fun.
Excellent. All right, so we've actually only got a little bit more to cover, and Tia's going to hate us because this is going to be a massive podcast.
Yeah.
But
let me throw out just a cover my ass here thing. So at least I've mentioned a number of different guilds or individuals that have rated it, and in no way am I objecting to the strategies that they've employed at various times. I am not finding fault with them. I really, anybody who knows me or has spent time with me, like, I really don't care what people do, and I'm not flinging insults or questioning people's abilities. I know there are some very talented people playing this game and very good at it, and I am not looking to start any big discussions on what's an exploit or what not an exploit, but cheesing mechanics, doing things like that. So just didn't want people to think like Oofalong's talking trash about somebody, because in no way did I mean to imply that.
Well, of course not. And I mean, there's a fine line, and this is a big discussion that's been going on in the community. What is an exploit? What isn't an exploit? What is supposed to be the way that it is, and what isn't supposed to be the way that it is? But at the end of the day, I have no problem with anybody beating the content however they need to do what they need to. As long as it's not, like, obvious. Like, don't go stand on a ledge where the boss is incapable of attacking you and taunt all day long and let everybody else cheese the mechanics. Obviously, it's not designed that way, but otherwise, until it's changed, if you need to do something to make it work, I'm okay with that. So, yeah, little bits and changes. How badly do you think it's impacted people, the fact that the cleanses are on a longer cooldown?
Go ahead.
Well, so in PvP, cleanses are a lot less interesting because they basically only work on stuns. So it's really just a PvE question. And in PvE, cleansing has been made more focused, I want to say. So there's not as much of, like, the Nightmare Draxus, where you get a corrosive grenade debuff on like 7 people and you have to cleanse 7 people and are they going to die, right? We don't have cleanse mechanics like that anymore. So the content has been changed. The Nephra cleanse mechanic, that's just not happening now. In terms of fights, the cleanse mechanics that you see are things like on Torque, where and obviously this is going to slightly spoil the mechanics for it, but like in hard mode Torque, right? There's 2 stun debuffs that go out periodically to members of the raid, and you have to cleanse them really fast because they not only stun you, which could put you in the wrong position, but they also apply a dot that it ticks very hard. So you have to coordinate getting those off. And if you have a healer who cleanses the wrong person, well, someone's going to die because it's going to be 15 seconds before the right person is going to get cleansed. There's a cleanse mechanic in Revan too, which is also, or hard mode Revan anyway, which is really, really interesting and is part of why Merc healers are so favored because they have the shorter cooldown. But by and large, just because of the way the content is adjusted now and the way the content is tuned, I don't think the cleansing is really too much of an issue.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that exciting about it. Assuming, and I haven't checked all of the existing PvE content that's out there, that in the instances where you actually had to cleanse things in the fight, assuming that they've adjusted all of that so that it's still clearable content without having to just heal through it, then, which to be fair is a valid strategy given the tier or the gear that you have now compared to what the operation probably is. But assuming they've updated all of the mechanics in the game to reduce the cleanse requirements, who cares? It isn't that big of a deal, in my opinion.
Interrupts. Now, I'm going to say flat out, I've noticed the longer duration on interrupts. Even when I was on my healer trying to help back people up, the length of the duration of interrupts has been frustrating, to say the least. Is it a good thing or a bad thing, in your opinion?
I mean, I don't know if it's... I feel like it's too early to tell. There are examples where it's good, and there are examples where it's bad. So what's the net? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, in PvP, frankly, it's very nice to be able to be a healer and not have everything I do interrupted on like a 6-second cooldown because, AP power tech. But I don't know. It makes you have to be a little bit more choosy about where you apply it. That's for certain. As a PvE tank, primarily, I kind of get annoyed. There's a couple of things in PvE, especially like just trash mobs and other stuff that's largely inconsequential, where I just want to keep it locked down. I just want to keep it interrupted. I want to be able to take care of that. And pre 3.0, I probably could have, but now I can't because my interrupt is on a longer cooldown, and so heaven forbid I have to coordinate with my raid team. But it's not really that bad.
Well, so I think what's interesting is that prior to this, everybody had, or not everybody, but there were already different interrupt cooldown durations. Some people, like I think the Watchmen Annihilation could get theirs to as low as 6 seconds, but through Talented, and then its base was lower. But other classes had a 12-second standard, so it was already pretty uneven, if you will. And so in theory, you already had to rely on people to help you out previously. But in any event, no big change.
Okay. Line of sight extended to 270 degrees instead of 180 degrees, which anybody that's been playing their ranged DPS enough has fully adapted with strafe and everything else to this effect. I'm wondering how many of them have even noticed a difference, as opposed to those people that never really understood what the hell was going on, now having an easier time of it. But what do you guys think of that?
I'm so annoyed. Oh my gosh. PvP. Well, so, when you watch experienced PvPers, right, they kind of have this very characteristic dance that they do where they kind of strafe through your character model back and forth, and they kind of weave around, and they time their weaving such that they're turning around and facing you at the exact moment where their GCD comes up, and they pass through you, and then they come back around. And it's PvP to be able to do that dance really effectively. You can sometimes use this to spot PvPers in PvE because they just habitually do this while they do their rotation. So
they're constantly running, constantly, and doing that whole weave.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Like if you watch me on my melee DPS, I actually do this habitually, even though I don't melee DPS in PvP all that often. But I tank in PvP, and it gets in your head and it gets in your hands, and you have a hard time getting away from it. But it's really annoying now that the efficacy of that has been reduced. I think it kind of lowers the barrier of entry of PvP just a little bit, but it also reduces some of the skill factor of positioning in PvP. So I'm pretty annoyed by that. On the flip side, the line of sight or the radius of sight thing is definitely a factor that you pay attention to sometimes more now as certain classes. So, for example, the various talents that allow you to do stuff on the move, like full auto or successive treatment, or even turbulence, right? If you're moving when you're doing that, and then you turn such that your radius of sight is broken, it will actually break the cast. So that's annoying. But I'm more annoyed by the PvP side of things than the than the PvE.
Yeah, the irony is that, like, if you're used to it, you always make sure that you're turning at the angle that keeps that angle, and you're not going to be breaking it because you learned the first time. Scheisse! It just freaking cut me off, and I don't want that to happen. Especially now that you have the mobile, like, full auto. You're definitely not going to want to clip it, even though you can run while you're channeling. You can still cut it off early if you get that line of sight issue, or angle of fire, which I just changed in the document. Channeled abilities having resources costs per tick as opposed to an upfront or at the end cost. I personally loving this. I think this is one of the most underreported values of the changes, is that we have much better resource returns now as a result of this very feature, because you're getting resources back while it ticks, and it's not ticking off a huge chunk at once.
So, yeah, to clarify, because while I wrote per tick, I'm not 100% sure that it's per tick or just periodically throughout the channel. You spend resources.
I think it is per tick.
So if you look at, okay, cool.
If you look at series of shots versus penetrating shots, because penetrating shots has 5 ticks, you can actually see the difference here.
Okay, well, there you
And
go.
series of shots has 3. Is that right?
I think series of shots has 4 actually. But,
4. Okay.
Yeah, and then you can see the difference in a couple of other areas, but it's more subtle. It is. I think this is a fantastic change. I think this should have been in here the whole time. It has some really, really nice impacts, like successive treatment or progressive scan, right? For example, it has an effective resource cost of 13, because by the end of it, you've naturally regenerated plus the resource cost along the way. Like, you don't have to worry about having an upfront cost of 28 energy, because you just don't have to worry about it. So you can use successive treatment at lower energy levels, med shot your way back up after that without dipping down. The same thing goes for full auto, for penetrating shots. Like all of these different channels, they have such a great effect on things, on the nonlinear classes. The thing where it annoys me, though, is it seems to have changed the way that BioWare scores some of the resource costs. So telekinetic throw, for example, or force lightning, is now baseline 40 force as opposed to being 30. That is very definitively a nerf for Shadow and Assassin tanks. And it's something that makes your resource management a little bit more noticeable. It's not a problem. You don't have a problem dealing with it. You just have to saber strike occasionally. But it's the only reason I can see for them to have justified that change is because of the progressive resource cost, and I don't like that trade-off.
I can't speak to that. I haven't played that. Okay. Channeled abilities do not suffer from pushback. For me, I actually generally don't like the raw removal of something. But at the same time, honestly, I hadn't played MMOs for like 2 or 3 years when I came to this one and came back into MMOs hardcore. And when I had first come back, I was like, why do we still have this here? So at the end of the day, I'm actually okay with it, because I was kind of wondering why it was there when I started playing.
Yeah.
I think that the pushback mechanic in general is pretty annoying. I mean, it does make the game just a little bit more visceral, but I don't know. Like, having your casts kind of skip just because you're taking raid damage is frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, it's effectively another interrupt. I mean, in some ways, while you're not canceling the entire ability, you're negating some of the benefit of it, and just whether it's PvP or PvE, it's just annoying. And yeah, I don't know. Positive change, in my opinion, to eliminate the pushback.
Yeah, and I mean, you could have a whole freaking lower conversation around what's effective as, making it visceral or whatever, but at the end of the day, I don't mind that a channel takes longer to finish casting, or not a channel, a cast takes longer to finish because you're getting distracted But when you're channeling and you're already doing the damage, it seems that if you're the kind of person that's doing that kind of ability, you can focus through it, and